for senators to complain that I didn't know this was happening. We've had many meetings that have been both classified and unclassified, that members have been invited to it. They don't come and take advantage of this. I can't say enough to say they shouldn't come and say, I wasn't aware of this, because they've had every opportunity to be aware of what these programs.
And that Harry Reid talking about the latest as it relates with the NSA ever-growing scandal program, whatever you want to call it. There seems certainly to be at this point a lot more questions than answers. Let's bring in Congressman Eliot Engel, Democrat from New York, who is kind enough to join us. What about what the senator said? That, listen, nobody can throw up their hands and say nobody told us. We didn't know the scope of the program. How much did you guys know in the House and Senate about not only the existence of the program, but how far-reaching it is and what?
Well, in terms of far-reaching, we didn't really know. They didn't tell us. We didn't know.
And by the way, is us, if you're in the intelligence committees in the House and Senate, you basically knew everything, and if you weren't, you didn't? Or is it?
I think that's fair, actually.
Yeah.
The Intelligence Committee gets to know a lot more than the average committees. And I think that we knew that there was a program like this. We didn't know the details of it, nor how extensive it is.
Should you have known?
Well, I think as members of Congress should know. I believe it. But I guess it's the way government operates. It shouldn't necessarily... Look, it's a balancing act. People say to me, well, what do you think? I'm concerned about civil liberties. I don't like government intrusion without warrants. On the other hand, we have some bad guys who are trying to kill us, and no one knows better than New Yorkers about 9/11. And so it's a balance, and the balance is uncomfortable at times because we really don't know where that balance is. But, welcome to the 21st century.
But I guess a couple things. One is, we now learned that bedside debate with John Ashcroft, then Attorney General, was he wasn't going to go for as far as the then Bush administration wanted to go with a program that now has even been further expanded under this president. And while it's a tough balancing act, don't you think we, the people, or at least you guys in Congress, deserve the debate? There's arguments for privacy and protection. What are the line? I'm not even sure what the right line is, but we never even had the debate or the conversation about it.
I'm with you. I'm upset about it. We deserve a debate. When these laws giving the government authority to do all these kinds of things were passed, they have to be renewed. So initially, after September 11th, I voted for this.
Yep.
And then I started to have questions, and I voted no every single time since, because I felt that in order to make a qualified decision on how to vote, I needed to know what was going on. I wasn't willing to, and I'm not willing to write a blank check. So although I care about security of our country, of course I do, but I wasn't willing to write a blank check, and I think I'm going to be proven right, but it's very, very troubling.
Yeah, I got to admit, I think most of this table would say, this current president, people give him more of a benefit of the doubt. Imagine if it was predecessor that we found out about this. Do you imagine if George W. Bush was sitting in the White House right now and the extent of the NSA program we found out? If we're being honest with each other, I think we'd probably have a lot more intense passion, debate, and furor over a president overstepping his bounds. This president's getting a little bit of a benefit of the doubt on this.
I'm not so sure. Look, we lived through the Iraq War and all kinds of intelligence that were fed to us, which were either lies or they were wrong.
Yeah.
And Bush survived. There were all kinds of talks of impeachment and whatever. No, I think the American people want to believe, by and large, except the real partisans, but the middle of the road, they want to believe that the president's doing the right thing, and I think they give any president the benefit of the doubt.
How about immigration reform? Senate gets through a program. What's funny is, I think it's even stricter. I mean, you'd know this better than me, than even the plan that then President Bush offered up in terms of the hurdles one would have to clear to become a citizen of the U.S. Is this thing DOA when it gets to the House? I mean, Boehner's already said he's going to want to rewrite the thing from scratch, but...
The strange thing, first of all, I'm for this bill. As a Democrat, I'm for this bill. As an American, I'm for this bill. As a Republican, I would be for this bill. First of all, what this does, it doesn't make it a cakewalk with, you've got 11 million undocumented people. They're here to stay. They're not going home. So we either try to legalize them and kind of make them legal,
Yep.
let them do certain things. I don't mean snap your fingers and overnight they become legal, but accept the fact that they're here, and instead of living on the kind of the fringes of society, they can come and live and be regular citizens.
And pay taxes.
And pay taxes. Many of them are paying taxes already. Their children, many of whom came here when they were 1 or 2. They only know the United States as their country. They can't even, some of them, many of them, most of them, speak the language of their home country. And so this is accepting reality as far as I'm concerned. Now, what the Republicans and others who are angry at the lack of security at the borders got, tough borders. There are fences that are going to be built. There's billions of dollars being spent on enforcement. So if I'm a Republican, I say, well, these people are here anyway. This doesn't make them citizens overnight. It's 13 years. They've got to do all kinds of things. Plus, we finally tightened border security, which was really not done under Reagan when there was amnesty. I think it's good for Republicans, but more importantly, it's good for Americans. I think that this is a good bill, and it ought to pass. Now, when it comes to the House, the problem is this, and poor John Boehner, he's got problems. First of all, he could pass the Senate bill tomorrow if he let the House work its will. You could pass it with 180 Democrats and 40 Republicans.
You think you get 40 Republicans?
Oh, I think you can get 40 Republicans. But the fact is, if John Boehner passes it like that, and by the way, that's similar to how Hurricane Sandy relief passed. Yep. But if you're Speaker, you can only do that just so many times. And John Boehner is faced with the fact that if he keeps relying on Democrats to pass bills, they'll throw him out as Speaker. And so he's really caught between a rock and a hard place. He would like this to go away. But I'm afraid that a lot of his Tea Party freshmen and sophomores aren't going to let it go away. And he's got a real dilemma. So he's talking about breaking out the issues piecemeal. Then you have to reconcile with the Senate. And I don't know if that's possible. But if I was a Republican, I would grab this bill. And you know what? I'm a Democrat. I'm grabbing the bill anyway.
Middle East. What gives you the most pause? Because as we speak right now, Cairo is basically on the clock in terms of the next uprising. Morsi said 48 hours. That was about 12 hours ago, if not more. You've got Syria, which seems to be going from bad to worse, with all sorts of potential implications here, and now even our involvement, albeit not boot on the ground. And then Iran, who keeps flirting with or without the nuclear option. What keeps you up at night the most of the three scenarios I laid out?
Well, I'm now the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, means I'm the lead Democrat, and if the House flipped, I'd be the chairman. So I read this stuff, know this stuff, hear this stuff, talk this stuff. The thing that really worries me the most in the Middle East is Iran. That is a regime unlike any that we've ever seen. Those of us that grew up as children of the Cold War, we didn't like the Soviets or the Russians, but we kind of knew they were somewhat rational. The Iranian leadership, it's a messianic leadership. And so we just don't know what they're willing or not willing to do. And I can tell you one thing, we need to unequivocally state, and the president has, that we will not allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon.
How close do you think they are to that?
Well, I think they're about a year away. And it of course presents an existential threat to our ally and friend Israel, which concerns me and concerns all of Congress. But it's also a threat to Europe, a potential threat to the United States. And what would happen if Iran had a nuclear weapon? You'd have Egypt getting one. You'd have Saudi Arabia getting one. You'd have Turkey getting one. You probably would have the United Arab Emirates getting one. There'd be a proliferation of nuclear weapons in the most volatile region of the world, the Middle East. And I think the Iranians are watching us very closely in terms of what we're doing in Syria. They want to see how resolved we are to try to make sure that Assad doesn't win the war. Now, people might say, well, why is it in the American interest? Who cares? It's a civil war. We're tired of wars. We've done Iraq. We've done Afghanistan. Who cares about Syria? Look, I don't think we should be in a war in Syria. I don't think we should have boots on the ground in Syria. But I think to do nothing is the worst possible thing. Because what's happened is Assad is a murderer of his own people from a humanitarian point of view. There are 100 million Syrians 100,000 Syrians that he's killed. of its own people. There are 7 million Syrians that are displaced within Syria, and 2 million Syrians that are refugees in other countries, destabilizing them, like Jordan and places like that.
But I'll give you the counter argument. I happen to agree with you, but the devil's advocate would say, okay, hold on a second. Every time we go to one of these Mideast nations that has some oppressive dictatorship, a bad guy like Assad, and we go and we support some democratic basic revolution in there, what ends up replacing it in many ways is just as bad, potentially even worse, or fomenting even more terrorist hotbeds than what replaced it. Are we acting not in our own self-interest? If we try to get Assad ousted, who knows what could fall in its place?
Well, what that doesn't take into account is that Assad is really Iran, and Assad is really Hezbollah, which is a terrorist organization operating out of Lebanon, Israel's arch enemy. And it's the Hezbollah fighters that have gone into Syria and turned the tide in favor of Assad. You know, there was a negotiation, or potential negotiation, between the Russians and the United States, and the Russians had no prize package either. But there was a possibility of trying to negotiate a post-Assad Syria. Except Hezbollah came in. Hezbollah is Iran's proxy, and they have turned the tide in the war, at least for now. And so Assad doesn't want to go. He's not going to negotiate anything of his own demise. And so it's strengthened the hands of Hezbollah. We cannot allow Hezbollah, who essentially has taken over Lebanon, to now take over Syria or be a important component in Syria, because that will again empower Iran to have a nuclear weapon. And that's why it's different. It's not only humanitarian, it's in U.S. strategic interests. Now, there are a couple of things that we can do, and I don't advocate boots on the ground, and I don't advocate the United States getting into a war, but we can have a no-fly zone, or we can use cruise weapons to make it impossible for the Assad people to use their runways to take off. We can dismantle their anti-aircraft systems. It can be done. It was done in Libya. NATO did it. This is tougher, no doubt about it.
But I've heard this been suggested to the president. What you just suggested was a lot more efficient than, for example, arming the rebels, because who knows where the arms fall into. Why hasn't this happened yet?
Well, I think we have to do both. We have, not one in lieu of the other. I think we have to arm the rebels. And by the way, we know who the Free Syria Army, well-vetted Rebens, General Idris, those are the ones that you arm. And again, is it a slam dunk? Is there an absolute guarantee? No, but I'll tell you one thing's a guarantee. If we sit back and do nothing, Hezbollah effectively takes over Syria, which means Iran takes over Syria. If Iran thinks we're going to do nothing now, do you really think they believe us when we say we won't allow them to have a nuclear weapon?
And I know Lee's got to hit a break. Last question. We talked at the beginning of the show about the student loan fiasco. It's absolutely ridiculous. One political question, one practical. Politically, why aren't Republicans right to say, hey, time out. We're supporting the president's plan here. If we're behind the president on this, why can't Democrats?
Well, right now what's happening, of course, is this playing out in the Senate, and you have these crazy machinations in the Senate. Look, I think Democrats and Republicans in Washington ought to do on student loans what we ought to do on the sequester and everything else. We ought to sit down and work it
But it never happens.
Well, but it should happen, and if people are unhappy with it not happening, then they should decide which party they think is most culpable and vote that party out.
Do you think they'll get a conscience this time? We're going to go over yet another cliff here. I mean, everybody assumes logic will prevail here before the kids go back to school in the fall and get this worked out. Do you have any inclination? We heard the same thing about sequesters. We heard the same thing about the debt limit, and both times it never happened until it was too late. Will D.C. get its act together on student loans?
I hope on student loans, because it affects everyone. You know, a sequester was a stupid idea. I voted no on this.
Do you know how scary that is? The fact that you're not even sure they can even get this done is such an indictment on D.C. today. My gosh.
Listen, I'm not going to defend it.
Yeah.
You know, I go there and I say what needs to be said as far as my constituents, care. But I think you've got a lot of people that have come in there, and frankly, I think it's the Tea Party Republicans. It's my way or the highway. They don't want to compromise, and we need to compromise. And poor John Boehner is caught in the middle.
Poor John Boehner. How many times do you think he'd say poor John Boehner? 3 times in 10 minutes. But hey, Congress.
Thank you.
Thank you as always. Okay. When we come back, everybody, we're going to head over to New York City, where Dominic Carter will be joining us. He just completed his conversation with Christine Quinn here. We'll see what she had to say. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.